The moment I opened my eyes, what met my gaze was the cold, damp greenstone floor. A cold steel blade rested against my neck. I slowly raised my eyes and saw young Shenfeng. He dismounted from his horse, carrying the wind and sand of the border passes with him, striding through the vermilion gates toward me. His battle armor was still stained with fresh blood, not yet changed. In his hand, he gripped tightly a marriage contract, wrapped in layer after layer of protective cloth. Everything was exactly the same as in my previous life. In my last life, he had rushed back to the capital from the distant border, covering thousands of miles on horseback. Risking the crime of deceiving the emperor, he presented a forged marriage contract he had created himself to the throne, begging His Highness to spare me from the suffering of exile. At that time, the anxiety and desperate resolve in his eyes had made my heart tremble violently. That was why I had shattered the predetermined chessboard of fate, willingly devoting my entire life to scheming and planning for him, advancing and retreating at his side. Who could have known that a twist of fate would cause us both to waste our entire lives? Fortunately, in this life there was still time to set things right. I lifted my head to look at Shenfeng. He was also lowering his gaze toward me. Those eyes were still bloodshot with rage, but the urgency had vanished, leaving only pain and hesitation, so he had returned as well. Shenfeng stood frozen before me, his hand clutching the marriage contract tightly, but he remained silent for a long time. Is young General Shen here to save someone? The special envoy from the Imperial City Division urged impatiently, his eyes falling on the marriage contract in Shenfeng's hand. Lately, there have been many cases of people forging marriage contracts to save others. I wonder if the one in the general's hand is real or fake. Shenfeng startled as if snapping out of a trance. Instinctively, he hid the marriage contract behind his back, pursed his lips, and turned his face away. After a moment, he finally steeled himself and spoke with difficulty. I cut him off, turning and kowtowing toward the special envoy. Reporting to Your Excellency, this commoner has never been betrothed, nor have I ever entered into a marriage agreement with young General Shen. Young General Shen is merely honoring our old friendship by coming to see me off for a distance. I hope Your Excellency will not blame him. Shenfeng abruptly turned his head back, staring at me in stunned silence. Lin Yao, you... His mouth fell open, his face filled with utter shock at the realization that I had also been reborn. I looked at him with calm eyes and offered a slight bow. Young General Shen, each person has their own destiny. You and I have our separate docks and our own boats to board. This is far enough for the farewell. In this life, consider this our goodbye. Shenfeng stood rooted to the spot. He knew I was responding to the words of farewell he had spoken on his deathbed. The special envoy's gaze swept over Shenfeng several times. He let out a cold chuckle, waved his hand, and the blade was pressed against my neck once more. I was escorted to my feet and walked past Shenfeng, stepping out through that vermilion gate. A line of tears slid down Shenfeng's face, but neither of us turned back. His tall, handsome steed and my prison cart stood before the vermilion gate, one heading left, the other right, gradually moving farther apart. I leaned against the prison cart, tilting my head to look at the red walls and black-tiled roofs lining the road. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Being given another chance, fate had finally returned to its proper course. This way, there were things Shenfeng would finally have the opportunity to learn. Our Lin family had never truly had its assets confiscated. In the current dynasty, treacherous ministers were running amok, leaving the empire teetering like a house on the verge of collapse. The Crown Prince, my father, and Ninth Prince Zhao Yuan were all those who wished to save that great edifice from crumbling. My father's exile was nothing more than a chess move they had jointly orchestrated to protect the Crown Prince's ascension. On the surface, it was asset confiscation and exile, but in reality, he held military command in the northwest. If chaos erupted in the capital, he would raise troops to safeguard the throne. If the Crown Prince ascended successfully, my father would be cleared of charges and restored to his post. As the sole bloodline of the Lin family, my own escape route had long been arranged. Ninth Prince Zhao Yuan claimed illness year-round and never left his residence, but in truth, half the chessboard in the capital was under his control. Gu Chao, the eldest legitimate son of Marca Zhenyuan, always wore an innocent, smiling face, but he had followed his father into battle since childhood and had achieved the ultimate military honor of sealing the Wolf Mountain at 17. The new top scholar Jiang Qingyan was said by all to be gentle as jade, upright and proper, yet no one knew that hidden in his sleeve was a secret memorial of old cases capable of overturning half the court. Each of them had prepared a marriage contract in advance, waiting only for me to nod and choose one so that I could remain in the capital and await the crown prince's enthronement. It was not a transaction, but the sincere entrustment and burden borne by those genuine men for their comrade. In my previous life I had chosen none of them, because Shen Feng had arrived. Shen Feng and I were childhood sweethearts. His father had once been my father's deputy general, and we had played together since we were young. That day when he fearlessly presented the forged marriage contract, my heart felt as if something had struck it hard. The marriage contract was fake. I knew it, he knew it, the crown prince knew it, everyone knew it. Yet he still knelt there straight-backed, speaking those deceitful words with even more conviction than if they had been true. I recalled the words Ninth Prince Zhao Yuan had said to me in the study. Lin Yao, if you don't want to, no one can force you. I recalled Gu Chao unsheathing his sword and handing it to me. Take it for self-defense. I recalled Jiang Qingyan helping me organize the dissertation drafts on the desk and saying softly, Miss Lin's writing is even better than mine. They were all waiting for my answer, but I had chosen Shen Feng. Half of it was out of fear that if I denied it, he would bear the crime of deceiving the emperor, fear that his solitary passion would ultimately cost him his head. The other half was because I was moved, not the fierce, earth-shattering kind of emotion, not the only you kind, but the kind where, in the depths of despair, someone suddenly pulled me back from the edge. I looked up and saw that the person's hand was trembling, his eyes red. So I couldn't bear to let go anymore. I had paid a heavy price for that choice. After our marriage, to prevent Shen Feng from being used as a pawn by the deposed crown prince's faction, I had secretly pushed them to submit memorials impeaching him. The charge was marrying the daughter of a criminal minister and helping the criminal's daughter escape punishment. This thoroughly severed any possibility of him being bewitched and used by the deposed prince's side. When faced with those impeachment memorials, he had never blamed me with a single word. He had simply held my hand firmly. Little Yao, don't blame yourself. I have never regretted it. Before the night of the crown prince's ascension, Shen Feng's father had wavered, plotting to aid the deposed prince in raising troops. Ninth Prince Zhao Yuan had shown me the secret letter. It was I who had begged my father to arrange for Shen Feng's father's old subordinates in the army to secretly suppress that momentary lapse in judgment. Although Shen Feng never knew about it, the first thing he did after the crown prince ascended was to submit a memorial requesting that my father be cleared of charges. The crown prince had laughed and said to me, Little Yao, it's a pity you didn't see it. That little fool looked ready to die for the cause. What spirit! There were countless similar incidents. To repay a fraction of his kindness, and to ensure the plan's perfection, I had never told him the truth. I had only secretly taken care of his aftermath, helping him rise to Minister of War by the age of 30. I had thought that such a passionate affection, such wholehearted devotion to each other, would at least be mutual. Who could have guessed that it was actually Shen Feng's lifelong regret? It was only on his deathbed that he finally let out that breath. Old and tear-streaked, he was in utter agony. In this life, I ultimately never betrayed any bond of affection or loyalty, only my own heart. He pushed my hand away, stroking the white jade hairpin he had kept for many years. If there is a next life, I don't want to save you anymore. The prison cart jolting me awake. I suddenly realized the corners of my eyes were wet. The escort team suddenly changed direction, turning from a quiet alley into an unassuming mansion. The courtyard gate closed. The special envoy from the Imperial City Division removed his official hat, revealing a youthful face. Miss Lin, you really gave me a scare. Chengdu removed my shackles for me, his movements swift yet respectful. Their Highnesses and the prince have been waiting for you inside. In the dimly lit study, the crown prince sat behind the desk, rubbing his brow. Gu Chao leaned against the window, idly playing with his sword. Jiang Qingyan stood before the bookshelf, a scroll in hand as he flipped through it. As for Ninth Prince Zhao Yuan, though he leaned back in the grand tutor chair, with his eyes closed, his hands gripped a string of sandalwood prayer beads so tightly that his fingertips turned white. Seeing me enter, all four looked up at once. Little Yao, you're back? The crown prince smiled as usual and called out to me. My eyes stung with bitterness. I smiled in reply. Yes, I'm back. Gu Chao still wore that pure, innocent smile. Jiang Qingyan's gaze remained as gentle as ever, only Zhao Yuan was slightly different. He remained silent, but those usually indifferent eyes now gazed at me deeply, as if spanning a long stretch of years, like a bottomless pool. Chengdu gave him an almost imperceptible nod, and only then did the fingers gripping the prayer beads finally relax. So he had been reborn as well. In the previous life, in the rush of the moment, I had defaulted to the betrothal with Shen Feng before discussing a flawless strategy with everyone. Shen Feng was a variable, and the unknown was precisely the trouble. Zhao Yuan finally lifted his eyes to look at me. Do you like him, or are you afraid he'll be charged with deceiving the emperor? My cheeks burned, but before I could speak, Zhao Yuan had already seen through me. His voice was low. Just go ahead and marry him. Leave the rest to me. That was one of the few things Zhao Yuan had said to me after the capping ceremony. Afterward, the 3 marriage contracts were burned in a flame. The firelight illuminated their calm faces. After a long while, Zhao Yuan's voice grew slightly hoarse. It's just one more variable, that's all. But Shen Feng's sincerity might not necessarily be a new asset. It was just a light remark from him. But it was only later that I learned that because of that variable, this frail 9th prince had blocked countless open spears and hidden arrows behind the scenes. That was why, in this life, Chengdu must have been arranged by him in advance to intercept Shen Feng. So when he saw Chengdu nod, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. The crown prince stood up and walked out from behind the desk, holding the 3 marriage contracts in his hand. Your father's secret letter has just arrived. He has safely reached his destination, so rest assured. However, the Northwest is a harsh place, and raising troops is far from certain. For now, you should quickly sign one of the marriage contracts and stay in the capital. The contracts were opened and laid out before me, one by one, 3 different handwritings, each heavy with deep affection. Yet I hesitated once more. In the previous life, Shen Feng had hidden the fact that he had someone in his heart in order to save me. What about this life? The 3 of them had given me 3 choices for the greater good. Would they therefore give up the ones they loved? I rolled up each marriage contract and pushed them back toward the crown prince. Your Highness, though the Northwest is harsh, this commoner is no delicate flower. I absolutely cannot ruin the good fortune of these 3 gentlemen out of concern for my own safety. The crown prince looked up in surprise, his gaze sweeping over the 3 men. Do you think they already have someone in their hearts? That they only reluctantly drew up these contracts out of respect for your father? His voice was full of disbelief as he assessed the men before him one by one. Gu Chao was the first to blush. This young master grew up in the military camp since childhood. Even the military doctors were all men. Jiang Qingyan smiled at me gently. Previously, I devoted myself entirely to studying and had no other thoughts. The crown prince crossed his arms, looking amused. So 9th uncle already has someone in his heart. Upon hearing this, Gu Chao immediately snatched Zhao Yuan's marriage contract. In that case, your highness the prince should withdraw. Zhao Yuan slowly raised his eyes. His indifferent gaze swept over Gu Chao. An inexplicable sense of oppression spread through the room. He stood up. His cold, pale hand blocked the contract in Gu Chao's grasp. Turning toward me, he advanced step by step until his shadow completely enveloped me. He bent down, lifted my wrist, and placed the marriage contract into my hand. His low voice brushed close to my ear. Choose boldly. The things you're worried about won't happen. With that, he turned to Chengdu, his tone brooking no argument. Make the preparations and escort Miss Lin back to the prince's residence to settle down. The study instantly erupted into chaos. Gu Chao and Jiang Qingyan both criticized Zhao Yan for not following the rules. On what grounds are you keeping her at your place? Your Highness has broken your word. On what basis did you make the first move? The crown prince sat to the side, having watched enough of the show, before pretending to put on a stern face toward me. 10 days. You must choose one within 10 days. You are the hostage your father left with me. Don't even think about running off to the Northwest. And so, my moving into the 9th prince's residence was decided just like that. Though Gu Chao and Jiang Qingyan looked at Zhao Yuan with contempt, they did not object. The remote residence of the ailing prince, an idle prince with no official post, was indeed the least conspicuous place. Jiang Qingyan said, His Highness would never mix public affairs with private ones. Gu Chao glared. That's right. His Highness still knows how to save face. During those 2 days, Shen Feng finally got his wish and went to propose marriage to the one in his heart. Second young Miss Chen had once disguised herself as a man in a fit of anger and sneaked into the military camp where she was rescued by Shen Feng. The moment she let down her hair, Shen Feng had been stunned. That white jade hairpin was exactly what he had kept from that time onward. The Chen family had accepted the marriage proposal. It was said that that night, Shen Feng had drunk alone until late, laughing and crying in his drunkenness. When I saw Shen Feng again, it was 2 days later. Chengdu sent word for me to wait for Zhao Yuan at the Eastern Market's bookshop. Coincidentally, Shen Feng was across the way with second young Miss Chen, selecting hairpins. Even though I wore a veiled hat, Shen Feng spotted me with a single glance. His entire body jolted, and then he kept losing focus. Second young Miss Chen stormed off in a huff and he hurriedly chased after my footsteps. "I know it's you." His voice was hoarse, laced with urgency. "Lin Yao, the prison is heavily guarded. How could you have bribed the jailers? This time, without me to protect you, don't act recklessly." Seeing that I couldn't avoid it, I had no choice but to turn back. "Young General, you're overthinking it. This commoner simply had some business to attend to, and happened to be passing by." Shen Feng rubbed his temples. He raised a hand to cut me off. The anxiety on his face had been replaced by exhaustion. "Lin Yao, we were husband and wife for a lifetime. There's no need to lie. Since you've gone to the trouble of following me here, we might as well speak clearly once and for all." Pain filled his eyes, yet his words were resolute. "This time, no matter what, I really won't save you anymore. Lin Yao, in our last life I already gave you perfection, but the person I love has never been mine. One cannot be too greedy in life. Some wounds, even after scabbing over, still ache fiercely when a cold wind blows across them. I would forever remember the kindness Shen Feng had shown me in my moment of desperation. I wanted to leave each other with a dignified ending. That was why, on the day of my exile, I had cut him off and proactively denied the marriage contract. And that was why now, I cut him off again and told him the truth. "Shen Feng, I wasn't lying. It is your duty not to save me. I hold no resentment." Shen Feng smiled bitterly. His eyes carried a stubborn light. "Of course it's my duty." His eyes began to redden. "So it's not that I'm heartless, not that I'm ungrateful. It's simply my duty, that's all." Those words sounded as if they were spoken to me, but they seemed even more like he was trying to convince himself. "When we were young, behind the mountain, you once saved my life. I have never forgotten. Lin Yao, in our previous life I already repaid everything. I forged a marriage contract for you, requested that your father be cleared of charges for you, and got dragged into the messy affairs of the Lin family, struggling to survive. Every step was like walking on a knife's edge, filled with endless dangers, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through. In the end, I even helped you receive a noble title." He looked up at me, tears shimmering in his eyes. I thought that was enough. He paused for a moment, his throat bobbed with difficulty. Yes, that was enough. He rubbed his face hard, remaining silent for a long time. Finally, his gaze turned resolute. "Therefore, I hope you will respect yourself and refrain from making any more pleas." My hand hidden in my sleeve trembled, tears slid down silently. Decades of deep affection exchanged for a bellyful of resentment, but who wouldn't resent it? I couldn't resent Shen Feng for being sincere back then. I could only resent fate for toying with us. I took a small step back. "In that case, I wish young General Shen a bright and promising future." With that, I turned and walked away quickly. Shen Feng was momentarily dazed but immediately chased after me. "Lin Yao, don't even think about bribing the jailers again. You know His Highness the Crown Prince will soon promote me. Just endure for a while. When the time comes, I will at least arrange a decent path for your exile." "I wouldn't dare trouble young General Shen," I interrupted him. "There's really no need for young General Shen to worry. This commoner has her own arrangements." At that moment, Shen Feng finally exploded. He strode forward and blocked my path. "Enough, Lin Yao." Veins of blood appeared in his eyes. His whole body was agitated to the extreme. "You don't need to drop hints with me. My conscience has already tormented me enough. But what exactly did I do wrong? In our previous life, today I was being impeached by everyone because I married you. Do you know how much pressure I was under? I thought of countless ways to turn danger into safety, but now? Not only have I obtained the person I've always longed for, but I've also stayed out of the vortex of factional struggles." His voice rose. He spoke as if affirming it to himself. "That's right, I only lived for myself once. What did I do wrong? Lin Yao, people shouldn't be greedy. I already gave you a grand wedding once. You shouldn't come swaying me again with this pitiful appearance." Even after saying that, he wasn't satisfied. He reached out to grab me, but his wrist was suddenly seized by someone else. An unfamiliar blade-wielding guard gripped Shen Feng's wrist tightly. A carriage had stopped not far away at some point. The carriage was modest in appearance but extremely high in status. The curtain lifted slightly, revealing a cold, pale hand with distinct knuckles. Shen Feng suddenly came to his senses and bowed slightly toward the carriage. A voice came from inside the carriage, as cold as water dripping into a deep pool. "Captain Shen, she is an honored guest of my residence. There is no need for you to trouble yourself with instructing her." Shen Feng didn't recognize the carriage from the ninth prince's residence. He only knew that the person inside must be a noble. In his previous life, after the crown prince successfully ascended, the ninth prince had gone into seclusion in Jiangnan. Even Gu Chao and Jiang Qingyan had pretended to be at odds like fire and water on the surface. Therefore, when Shen Feng saw me step into that carriage, his face showed shock mixed with pain. He probably thought I was selling myself to avoid exile. Lin Yao, don't go down the wrong path. It's only a few years of bitter exile. How can you not endure it? He chased after me for a few steps, but was stopped by the guards. His eyes remained fixed on the carriage. Lin Yao, you know this. You only need to wait for me a few days. Zhao Yuan lowered the carriage curtain, his expression as dark as still water. Shen Feng still thought that in a few days the crown prince would promote him. I nodded slightly behind the veil. Shen Feng didn't know that in our previous life, the crown prince had valued him partly because of the sincerity he showed in forging the marriage contract, and partly because of the forced connection his betrothal created with the Lin family. But in this life, he had not done so. Zhao Yuan's face had always made strangers keep their distance. Now his silence made him even more inscrutable. I assessed him from behind the veil. A loose black cloak draped over his shoulders only accentuated his sickly pale skin. The faint dark circles under his eyes showed that in the 2 days he hadn't returned to the residence, he clearly hadn't rested at all. Having been reborn, many things could be calculated more carefully. I just didn't know if he had calculated a better ending for himself. I unconsciously became lost in thought. Zhao Yuan slowly raised his eyes again. His profound gaze accurately met mine. That single look made one's heart tremble slightly, as if piercing through decades of springs and autumns, lingering in old memories. Have you looked enough? He asked. I didn't avoid his gaze, facing him through the veil just like that. The sandalwood prayer beads on his wrist tightened silently once more. If you're still unwilling to accept it regarding Shen Feng, there are other ways. It was another light remark. Even after living another life, he still restrained himself to the point where only the veins on the back of his hand stood out. I shook my head. It was only a sigh. Having been given another chance, I also have my own regrets that need to be compensated. Zhao Yuan's breathing hitched for a moment. After a long pause, he said in a low voice, 3 years later, Jiang Qingyan will go south to provide disaster relief, contract a plague and nearly die. Afterward, he will marry the female doctor who saved his life, and the two of them will live in mutual respect as if newlyweds. I looked at him quietly. His throat moved slightly. 5 years later, an enemy nation will seek a marriage alliance. All the princes in the court will already have families, so Gu Chao will marry the princess for peace, ensuring decades of peace on the borders. Such long sentences were the most straightforward expression possible from the cold, reticent ninth prince. Even through the veil, I could clearly see the turbulent waves in those eyes. I knew everything. From the moment he told me, just go ahead and marry, to the fact that he would spend his life in seclusion in Jiangnan without ever marrying. I had known from beginning to end. At first I hadn't dared to believe it, and later I couldn't believe it. Zhao Xuan's chest rose and fell slightly. So, have you made your choice yet? I nodded firmly. The moment the carriage stopped, Zhao Yuan said nothing and stepped through the front gate. I felt a bit uneasy inside, but once we entered I discovered that the other 2 marriage contracts had already been burned in the brazier. Zhao Yuan put away his own copy. His movements were still steady, but his voice trembled slightly. Tomorrow, I will enter the palace to request the imperial decree. Shen Feng did not receive news of the crown prince's promotion. Instead, he received an imperial decree. He once again affirmed his decision in his heart. That's right. Living for myself was the correct choice. By not forging the marriage contract, I avoided impeachment, and because of that, I received even greater favor than what the crown prince had shown me. To be honest, ever since Lin Yao had come looking for him, he hadn't had a single good night's sleep. He began recalling the good times between him and Lin Yao, the moments they had stood shoulder to shoulder, the joy that surged in the depths of his heart, those knowing glances that needed no words. It would be a lie to say he wasn't moved. He even recalled multiple times the state of mind he had when presenting the forged marriage contract. Was it truly out of helplessness due to circumstances, or had it been a firm choice after comparing the two? He felt somewhat dazed. The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. Until the moment the imperial decree arrived. The haze of the past few days instantly cleared. In the blink of an eye, everything became clear to him. That's right, my choice was not wrong. He knelt prostrate on the ground, both firm and reverent, raising both hands high to receive his glory. But what he heard was an order not to return to the capital without summons, to remain in the suburbs of the capital training troops, and not to return to the border. Shen Feng was somewhat dazed. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. In his previous life, the crown prince had valued him, and the emperor had regarded him with favor. It was true that he had left his post without permission, but he hadn't been punished. In his previous life, many people had valued him and many had secretly helped him. Even during that impeachment, there had been unfamiliar colleagues who had exerted themselves to help him. But, now, what exactly had gone wrong? He accepted the decree in confusion and fell into another round of analysis. He asked second young Miss Chen whether the Chen family had offended the emperor. Right after the two of them had regained their composure and were about to cause trouble for him. Was this a warning to the Chen family? Second young Miss Chen flew into a rage. You're being completely unreasonable. Weren't you the one who was so eager to rush back to see off that so-called childhood sweetheart? Now that you've been punished, you're blaming it on our Chen family. It's good that this marriage is cancelled. From now on, don't come looking for me again. Second young Miss Chen left. Shen Feng looked at the young willow sprouts just beginning to bud in the courtyard. His heart suddenly felt empty and desolate. He recalled that on this day in his previous life, when he had been tormented by the impeachment, Lin Yao had stood beneath that willow tree, firmly holding his hand. Her gentle yet resolute words of comfort had inexplicably put his heart at ease. Shen Feng shook his head vigorously, trying to drive Lin Yao out of his mind. This round of analysis ultimately yielded no reason, but he knew that if he wanted to stay on the track of his previous life, he should quickly go see the crown prince once. Zhao Yuan had very quickly obtained a secret imperial decree for the marriage. In the study, Gu Chao made a huge fuss. Do you even know what righteousness is? Did you use some despicable method or something? Zhang Qingyan, who was usually gentle, also showed some dissatisfaction. Your Highness won the match through shady means. Forcing a marriage like this will never end well. The crown prince had seen enough of the spectacle. Noticing my flushed face, he understood at once and turned to lead me outside. Come on, let's go see the dowry I've prepared for you. A plain carriage rolled along the quiet road, yet Shen Feng still managed to learn of the crown prince's movements. The instant I stepped out of the shop, before I could even stay alert, I ran straight into him. His eyes narrowed, then instantly filled with shock and fury. Lin Yao, you really are stubbornly refusing to wake up. He strode forward a few steps and blocked my path, lowering his voice to demand. Are you trying to use me to get close to the crown prince for help? He had already decided that was exactly what I was doing and gave me no chance to explain. Lin Yao, I don't owe you anything. The perfect life you had in our last life was already a favor from me. I've made myself perfectly clear this time, so why are you still clinging on? His Highness's appreciation for me. All those favors are for me. Without me paving the way for you, a criminal's daughter like you. Do you really think His Highness would even glance your way? His face turned icy, his gaze resolute. Before His Highness arrives, leave quickly. If he finds out you bribed the jailers and are currying favor with nobles everywhere, even if I step forward, I won't be able to save you. He reached out to pull me, but I leaned aside and dodged. Young General Shen seems to have a rather poor memory. I already told you. We each have our own path. Whoever keeps clinging on is the one lacking manners. Shen Feng gave a cold laugh, helplessly rubbing his forehead. You call that each having our own path? You're using our past connection to latch on to my influence. Tell me who exactly is clinging to whom. My expression darkened. Shen Feng saw my face and faltered for a moment, as if remembering something. His features softened. Little Yao, I know you can't stand hardship, but I promised you that if you just wait for me a few years in exile, once I become Minister of War, there'll be nothing I can't do for you. Before he could finish, the crown prince's carriage approached from afar. Shen Feng hurriedly pushed me aside, signaling me not to act rashly, then knelt respectfully himself and announced his name loudly. But after he spoke, there was no movement from inside the carriage. So Shen Feng raised the memorial in his hand high and declared that he wished to present a strategy and serve His Highness. The suffocating silence stretched on until cold sweat beaded on his forehead. A guard leaned in to receive orders from inside the carriage, then turned and walked toward us. Feng breathed a sigh of relief, stood up and offered the memorial, but the guard ignored it and walked straight past him. Bow to me. Is the young miss satisfied? If so, this servant will have the shop wrap it and deliver it to the residence. Shen Feng stared at me in disbelief. He had known this particular guard in his previous life. By now he should have remembered that every time the Crown Prince sent word to him before, this guard would casually ask after me as well. I nodded to the guard. The guard bowed and led the way. I stepped into the Crown Prince's carriage 1 foot at a time, and the carriage rolled away once more. Shenfeng's face flushed crimson. Only then did the guard seem to notice him. He spoke indifferently. His Highness the Crown Prince is not inside the carriage. Captain Shen would be better off taking that memorial straight to the imperial court and presenting it to His Majesty. The carriage drove off into the distance. Shenfeng remained frozen for a long time, unable to snap out of it. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, he staggered into the very shop Lin Yao had just left. That shop was famous. It was said that among the 10 miles of red dowry favored by the capital's noble houses, a portion always came from here. In that moment, Shenfeng couldn't describe the feeling in his chest. He only sensed something crumbling inside him, as if all the strength had been drained from his body. He realized 2 things at once. The first was that Lin Yao was about to marry someone else. The instant that thought surfaced, Shenfeng knew he was panicking. He had never imagined it would happen so quickly. He had assumed that without him, she would at least wait in the cold for 3 years. 3 years later, if she still couldn't let him go, his minister's mansion wouldn't mind setting another place at the table. He had considered every possibility except that Lin Yao would marry someone else so soon. Even though he had said countless goodbyes before, only now did Shenfeng truly understand that they were really about to part ways for good. The second realization was that Lin Yao seemed to have known the Crown Prince for a long time. Once the thought took root, countless tiny clues connected in his mind. In his previous life, the first time a guard from the Crown Prince's residence came to deliver a message, Lin Yao had given him a faint nod so subtle it was almost imperceptible. Every time the guard paid respects, he had always bowed to Lin Yao first before turning to him. And that very first meeting between the Crown Prince and himself in the previous life, now that he thought back, it had been the exact day he was impeached over the forged marriage contract. Lin Yao had said at the time, "This might not be a bad thing." The moment she finished speaking, the imperial decree had arrived. That day, the Crown Prince had simply looked at him and smiled, his eyes filled with unmistakable admiration. Shenfeng had once wondered where that admiration had come from. But once glory showered down on him, he had simply assumed he had always shone that brightly. He still remembered that day. The Crown Prince had rewarded him with several boxes of pastries, and he had happily brought them home to Lin Yao. Lin Yao had opened the hidden compartment with practiced ease, picking out the sweet pieces that suited his taste. There were far too many details, too many to breathe through. Shenfeng felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He didn't dare think any further. He had to find Lin Yao and demand the truth. He wanted her to tell him his suspicions were wrong, that she wasn't about to marry someone else, that she had never known His Highness the Crown Prince. Zhao Yuan said, "Shenfeng has gone to the prison to inquire about you and learned of your betrothal." I understood what Zhao Yuan meant. He was asking how I wanted to handle Shenfeng. In this life, Shenfeng had already become engaged to second young Miss Chen. He knew that second young Miss Chen's father had been the one leading the impeachment against him in the previous life. Because of that impeachment, Shenfeng and the Chen family had ended up on opposite sides. Later, after the Crown Prince ascended, her father retired to the countryside and Shenfeng never saw second young Miss Chen again. This time, he probably wanted to salvage that situation, just as he had saved me and my father in the previous life, bestowing his own glory upon the Chen family. But they didn't know that second young Miss Chen's father was a staunch supporter of the deposed Crown Prince, and had intended to use Shenfeng as a pawn. In the previous life, I had pushed for that impeachment. In this life, Shenfeng had willingly turned himself into a pawn in the man's hands. Second, young Miss Chen's father had arranged for him to train troops in the suburbs, where most of the soldiers were loyal to the deposed prince. My gaze fell on the back of Zhao Yuan's hand. The string of sandalwood prayer beads had been gripped so tightly that red marks stood out against his pale skin. I gently placed my hand over his and slowly stroked it. Nothing is more important than what you need to do. Their shared ambition was to build a prosperous era and bring clarity and justice to the world. Not only could Shenfeng not be an exception, I couldn't, and no one could. In the previous life, Jiang Qingyan's hair had turned white by 30, Gu Chao had lost an arm at 27, and the Crown Prince had exhausted himself until his body was riddled with old injuries. Since we had been given another chance, what Zhao Yuan and I had to do was do everything in our power to reduce that suffering. Zhao Yuan's hand was a little cold, but his eyes were clouded with darkness. That look made my heart skip with unease. I wanted to pull away, but he caught my wrist. Don't wait for the Crown Prince's ascension, let's marry first. Shen Feng took up his post in the suburbs and began training troops. News that I, the daughter of a criminal minister, was marrying 9th Prince Zhao Yuan spread throughout the capital. Shen Feng seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. He had lingered near the 9th Prince's residence for several days before finally finding a chance to speak with me. I thought you were using my connections to approach the Crown Prince, so I spoke harshly last time. Don't take it to heart. If the Crown Prince is helping with your dowry out of respect for the 9th Prince, that makes sense. But the 9th Prince has no power or influence. In a few years he'll even be exiled to Jiangnan. Why fixate only on what's right in front of you? I looked at the man who had stood by my side for decades in the previous life, my heart full of complicated feelings. I let out a quiet sigh and couldn't help reminding him, Shen Feng, now that you're training troops in the suburbs, you shouldn't leave your post without permission. If anything happens in the camp, how will you bear the consequences? That was as far as I could say, but Shen Feng seemed to think I was mocking him. Training troops in the suburbs is only temporary. Whether you follow that sickly prince into exile in Jiangnan or stay in the capital under the protection of a minister's mansion, you should think it through carefully. Shen Feng's dream of becoming Minister of War had not yet been shattered. Before he could recover from the blow, a squad of armed guards marched in and surrounded him tightly. A mutiny had broken out in the suburban camp. Shen Feng had been careless and was arrested and thrown into prison. As he was being led away, he turned back in panic to look at me, remembering the exact words I had just spoken to him. This had been a probe by the deposed prince's faction. Half the soldiers in the camp were already their loyal men. They had used the opportunity of Shen Feng taking command to plant more of their own. If the probe failed, the faction would use Shen Feng to threaten his father into joining them, holding the son hostage to control the father. If it succeeded, they would gain everything and lose nothing. That was why the imperial decree punishing Shen Feng had been requested by the Chen family. It was inside the prison that Shen Feng finally pieced everything together. I secretly visited him once, arranged by Zhao Yuan. He spoke with perfect composure. Although people have already been placed on General Shen's side, it would still be better to avoid bloodshed if possible. You can try working through Shen Feng. He said it that way, but I knew he had hidden a trace of personal feeling for my sake. When I saw Shen Feng, he looked like a different person, gaunt and haggard, only his eyes still burned with stubborn unwillingness. The Chen family has broken the engagement, he said. I didn't know what to say to comfort him. He then added, I'm not sad. He looked at me with a hint of grievance. How come you aren't sad at all? His chin trembled slightly. Why is it only now that I realize the thing I've regretted all along wasn't you, but another possibility I never chose? He gripped the iron bars, his eyes weak and helpless. That was the exact expression he wore whenever he had made a mistake. He was a proud man. In the previous life he had never apologized directly when he was wrong. He would simply show me this face, and my heart would soften at once. I knew that if I didn't continue the conversation, he wouldn't say another word. The two of us stared at each other in silence. I took out brush and ink and handed them to him. For now, set your father's mind at ease. Don't act impulsively and make a bigger mistake. A flash of joy crossed Shen Feng's face. Little Yao, even now you're still thinking for my sake. I shook my head. It's not only for you, I simply don't want to see innocent blood spilled. The light in Shen Feng's eyes dimmed instantly. Only then did he notice the corner of a sleeve visible in the shadows. Beneath the black sleeve, slender fingers were slowly turning a superior string of sandalwood prayer beads. In that instant, a long-buried memory surged up. He seemed to have seen those beads before. 1 year after the Crown Prince's ascension in the previous life, when he had entered the palace to discuss affairs, a similar string of beads had hung in the Crown Prince's inner chambers, polished to a glossy shine that left a deep impression. The Crown Prince had once said, "That is my pillar of support." The truth he had refused to face was becoming clearer by the second. The hand that had appeared at the carriage window and the arm in the prison now belonged to the same person, 9th Prince Zhao Yuan. If the 9th Prince was the Crown Prince's true pillar of support, then many things from the previous life could finally be explained. Shen Feng's hand shook. It took him several attempts before he finished writing the letter to his father. He no longer tried to bring up the past with me. After handing me the letter, he turned away, hunched over, and said nothing more. Zhao Yuan took the letter and led me out of the prison. The lantern light gradually dimmed. Shenfeng's silhouette slowly curled into a ball and collapsed to the floor. Because of Shenfeng's situation, events moved faster than in the previous life. Before Shenfeng's father could even receive the letter, he had already raised troops to aid the deposed prince's rebellion. The secret scouts couldn't get word out in time. The troops launched their uprising directly. Thanks to prior preparations, General Shen was defeated and surrendered before he could even leave his defensive zone. The deposed prince's forces in the capital also launched a palace coup, but everything was quelled even faster than before. The deposed prince failed. The emperor abdicated. The crown prince ascended the throne. The only difference from the previous life was that this time my father had no choice but to raise troops in the northwest to protect the throne. General Lin Zhenyuan's army surrounding the imperial city was passed around by children in the streets like a heroic tale. In this way, my father could no longer hide his achievements and remain anonymous as he had in the previous life. The new emperor was benevolent. Considering the letter Shenfeng had written in prison, he pardoned him. Shenfeng knew the pardon came from the new emperor's own will. The moment he walked out of prison, he forced himself to stand, a new spark of hope igniting in his chest. He told himself the new emperor had finally noticed him. "Lin Yao, rest assured," he said. "Even though you have some connection with the new emperor and the ninth prince, it would be inconvenient for them to step forward and clear your father's name. Leave it to me." The moment he finished speaking, a group of children ran past the gates of the prince's residence, laughing and singing. The north wind was cold, the grass and trees yellow. General Lin was exiled to the northwest straw for a bed, pickled vegetables in a jar, 100,000 soldiers guarding the barren land. Just one call from the capital, and they would bring mighty troops to rescue the king. The children's song rang out again and again. Shenfeng's face turned deathly pale. He grabbed the last little girl running by. "What are you singing?" The little girl blinked her round eyes. "You don't even know this? Everyone knows the story of Marshal Lin leading the army to protect the throne. How can you not?" The children burst into laughter. "Haha, this guy looks a bit stupid. Doesn't even know Marshal Lin. Ha ha ha." Shenfeng's breathing grew ragged. He staggered back several steps. "Who is this Marshal Lin you're talking about? I couldn't bear to look at him. My father." "Lin Zhenyuan, does that ring a bell?" Shenfeng smiled, but his eyes were crying. That silent smile stretched on for a long time before he finally made a sound. "So your father was never exiled at all? He was simply hiding troops in the northwest, ready to protect the throne at any moment." I nodded, acknowledging it. "I'm sorry. This matter was too important. I couldn't tell you." Shenfeng finally laughed out loud, his face twisting. "So in the previous life, the crown prince valued me because I saved you, not because of any so-called talent of mine. So all those unfamiliar colleagues who treated me well, so the fact that I requested your father's name be cleared everything was because of you." The new emperor's face was full of joy. Without lifting a finger, he had helped me achieve what I wanted. Shenfeng spoke faster and faster, each question adding another layer of pain to his face. "Lin Yao, then what am I?" He clutched his chest and roared in despair. "Tell me, what exactly am I?" His expression was filled with utter grief. "I thought I was the hero who turned the tide of the court. I thought I was the loyal and righteous champion who rescued the Lin family from the fire. I thought I was exceptionally gifted, rising to Minister of War by 30. He finished, and a mouthful of blood sprayed out. "Lin Yao, is this joke amusing to you?" He shakily wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. "Lin Yao, when you looked at me jumping around like a clown in front of you, were you secretly calling me ridiculous in your heart? When I righteously told you not to come begging me, not to ask me for another peaceful life, were you sneering at me inside? I'm just a fool, Lin Yao. And I actually told you not to cling to my connections. What connections do I even have? They were all yours. They were your network, your comrades who fought shoulder to shoulder with you. What am I? I'm a clown, a toy held in the palm of your hand. A chess piece who thought he was the player." Shenfeng's body went limp, as if his spine had been pulled out. He slid down and sat heavily beside the red gate. "But why couldn't you have just told me the truth? Was I not worthy? From beginning to end, you always believed I wasn't worthy." Shenfeng's words struck my heart like a hammer. I had never thought of him the way he described. At first, I couldn't tell him another person knowing meant another layer of danger. Later, I couldn't bear to tell him. I didn't want that passionate young man to have to bend his proud back. I loved him, so I wanted to protect his pride and his sense of duty. My eyes reddened. No matter what, I had never imagined that the boy who had once charged through fire with sincere passion would end up like this. I wasn't sure if I had done something wrong. That was why Zhao Yuan, who had been sitting quietly in the carriage, could no longer remain still. He lifted the curtain and looked down at Shen Feng. When exactly did you want her to speak? His cold voice carried natural authority. When you presented the marriage contract without permission, or after you had achieved fame and success. Shen Feng froze, then looked up, his eyes a little dazed. At first, she didn't speak because she wanted to accept your kindness and keep your passionate heart from rolling on the ground. Later, she didn't speak because she didn't want you to feel indebted to her and break your own spine. Zhao Yuan spoke each word clearly, his indifferent and probing gaze seeming to pierce straight into Shen Feng's soul. Young General Shen has spoken so righteously. Then tell me, when you forged that marriage contract, was it truly and completely for the greater good, without a single shred of personal motive? Shen Feng's eyes flickered. In the end, he looked away. The question that had haunted him rose once more. Back then, had he been forced by circumstances or had he made a firm choice after comparing Lin Yao and second young Miss Chen? The moment Lin Yao had stepped into Zhao Yuan's carriage, Shen Feng had remembered that familiar feeling, an extreme panic and unease. When he had rushed back from the border thousands of miles away, the only thought in his mind had been that, no matter what, he could not let Lin Yao suffer. At that time, he had forgotten the hesitation he once felt between Lin Yao and second young Miss Chen. He had only remembered that losing Lin Yao made everything else unimportant. In the many years that followed, he had almost forgotten second young Miss Chen even existed. Only now, after sailing smoothly through life and obtaining power, wealth, and status all within his grasp, did he look back and realize that second young Miss Chen had quietly left the capital forever. Those tiny, insignificant regrets had been magnified infinitely. Just a little less of the old affection, and everything else would have been perfect. So it was as if he were a savior given another life, choosing to save someone else first and make up for his own small regret. What was wrong with that? Shen Feng lowered his head and buried his face in his hands. So stop pestering Lin Yao anymore. Zhao Yuan's voice was frighteningly cold. She already gave you a perfect life. What face do you have left to demand another one? Young General Shen, one cannot be too greedy in life. So it's best if you never speak those pleas again. I looked at Zhao Yuan in astonishment. Those words sounded so familiar. They were exactly what Shen Feng had once said to me. Zhao Yuan had remembered every single one and thrown them back at him intact. The carriage began to move. Before lowering the curtain, Zhao Yuan gave Shen Feng one final sentence. Don't blame Lin Yao. If you must blame someone, blame yourself for forgetting your original heart. The carriage rolled toward that quiet courtyard. My father and the new emperor were discussing my marriage in the study. Gu Chao and Jiang Qingyan were there as well. Earlier we set the betrothal, because we didn't know when you would return. Who could have guessed that Marshal Lin would be back in less than half a year? In that case, the betrothal should be cancelled. The one who spoke was Gu Chao. Jiang Qingyan nodded in agreement. At first it was forced by circumstances. Now that the overall situation is settled, Miss Lin can consider the long term. Zhao Yuan pushed open the study door. The room fell instantly silent. The new emperor laughed heartily, unafraid of stirring up trouble, and nodded. What the two of you said makes sense. I wonder what ninth uncle thinks. Zhao Yuan said nothing. He released my hand and performed a deep bow toward my father. And so the auspicious date of the first day of the 8th month was set. The study erupted into noise once more. I sat quietly to the side, my heart aching with bittersweet emotion. This was one of the rare moments of lightness for them. I believed the reason I had returned was to pour every ounce of my strength into the rest of my life, so that on their heavy road of responsibility, they might encounter one less bump. I never expected to see Shen Feng again. On the day of the grand wedding, the residence was filled with excitement. Because my father was present, guests flocked in droves. Shen Feng blended into the crowd and quietly placed a white jade hairpin on the gift list. It was the very hairpin he had personally carved in the previous life, the one I had loved most. But when he saw the two names on the gift list, his expression changed dramatically. Those two rare treasures, I had possessed them in the previous life. He had once asked about their origin, and I had simply said they were from an old friend of my father. Now he finally saw their names, heir of Marca Genuan Gu Chao, and new top scholar Jiang Qingyan. He had lived long enough to know exactly what kind of heroes those two were, and how much they had supported him in secret. In this moment, Shenfeng felt nothing but mockery. So they had all been the ones steering the great ship, while he had wandered into the Pearl Pavilion by a single kind thought, and enjoyed a lifetime of shelter like a clown. He took back the hairpin and staggered out of the Lin residence. The night at the prince's residence was especially lively. Gu Chao kept forcing wine on Zhao Yuan and refused to let him go. In the end, Jiang Qingyan complained that Gu Chao had no self-control, and dragged him off to a tavern for a drinking contest. The two had never gotten along, so most of the guests left the banquet to watch the spectacle. Zhao Yuan was finally able to return to the bridal chamber. The noise gradually faded and the room grew quiet. Zhao Yuan sat on the edge of the bed. The deep red wedding robes only made his already pale skin look even colder. Yet between his brows and at the corners of his eyes there was none of the usual distant chill, only a rare gentleness. "What are you thinking about?" His voice was soft, candlelight danced in his deep eyes. I walked over and gently took his hand. "I was thinking about what your highness once said, if I just marry you, the rest is up to you." Zhao Yuan's breathing faltered. After a moment of silence, he suddenly pulled me into his arms. Red robes fell away. The room filled with spring warmth. Once the passion that had been suppressed by the candles broke free, it surged like a mountain flood, sweeping us under until we could no longer surface. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was already high in the sky. I turned my face away, too embarrassed to look at Zhao Yuan. Just remembering those whispered words in the dark was enough to make my heart race and my cheeks burn. "Little Yao, does it feel good?" He leaned close to my ear. The moment I opened my mouth, my voice came out broken and tearful. Every last bit of my old impression of that frail, sickly prince crumbled bit by bit beneath his burning hands. Seeing me blush, Zhao Yuan pulled me back into his arms and pressed his lips to the back of my neck. "What are you hiding from? Didn't you say the rest is up to me?" Those unrestrained days stretched on for a long time. The track of the previous life continued forward as before. A plague broke out in the south, and enemy nations invaded from the north. On the day the army set out from the city gates, Gu Chao led troops north. Jiang Qingyan headed south for disaster relief. The new emperor stood on the high wall to see them off from afar. Gu Chao rode past Jiang Qingyan on horseback. "Pretty boy, plagues are merciless. Take care of that frail body of yours." Jiang Qingyan, neither arrogant nor humble, replied, "Thank you for your concern, young Marcus. Enemy troops are cunning, don't be too reckless yourself." The ruler and his ministers laughed heartily. The two men said nothing more, simply sharing a deep look before turning their gazes toward the city wall. Then they wheeled their horses and left. That glance said only two words: take care. Each would protect his own path and wait for the other. This prosperous era would come one day. The crowd gradually dispersed. Zhao Yuan's and my carriage also left the city gates, heading south toward Jiangnan. Shenfeng's figure hid among the onlookers. He watched those young men with grand ambitions charge toward their own battlefields, and the passion in his chest finally boiled again after so long. Once he had been one of them. Once, he had fought shoulder to shoulder with them. In that clear and prosperous era, a portion of the credit had belonged to him. But now he didn't even have the chance to step onto the chessboard anymore. In the end, he understood that none of this could be blamed on Lin Yao. The only one to blame was himself for betraying his own original heart.